Let me call the meeting of the Alameda County Water District January board meeting to order, please. Roll call.
Directors Akbari,
Here.
Gunther,
Here.
Sethy,
Here.
Weed,
Here.
and Huang.
Here. Let's see, Director Weed, would you lead us in a salute to the flag, please?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right, so next is public comments. Members of the public may address the board on any issue not listed on the agenda, which are within the purview of the Alameda County Water District. A 5-minute limit is customary. However, the board president may adjust the actual time allowed to accommodate the number of speakers. Members of the public who wish to address the board on a scheduled agenda item should approach the speaker's podium at the time the item is introduced. Do I have any members of the public that wish to address the board? No? Actually, why don't you approach the podium since it's not on? Is that okay?
The Help on Tap program typically would be covered under miscellaneous fees and charges, which is on the agenda this evening.
I see. Okay.
Having said that, of course,
No, which is fine. Let's see. Timing-wise, I also don't want to keep you here for that long.
yeah,
so.
we do have several, I think, multiple presentations between now and that item.
Pat?
It's up to the president of the board.
So is actually okay for me to take the comment now so they could go? So by all means, please approach the podium. This way you don't have to stay till the bitter end.
Okay, so I was here at the last meeting, and I spoke to you guys a little bit about the Help on Tap program, how it helps. So in our situation, the way the county does the adjustment for the total gross income, we pay health premiums for the year, and when it comes to the total gross income at the year end, if you're a regular employee, they take that out before they do your total gross income. But if you're a retiree, they do not take that amount out. So your total gross income is fluctuated, depending on what it is. So it should not be different for both of the situations, either one, but it is. So I wanted to approach the board and see if they can take that into account, whether it's pre-tax, post-tax, like that. And we pay last year I think we paid close to $7,000 in health premiums, and that was not taken out of our total gross income. So it was fluctuated by $7,000 pretty much. So I know when I came last time, they said they were going to do some kind of board adjustment or increase or something to see if that will help. But I think they should also take into consideration certain circumstances that may not apply to everybody and only to certain people. So if they can do some kind of adjustment or exception or whatever, So I don't know, you're going to vote on something, but I don't know how much the increase is, if that's going to help us or not. So I don't know how much of an increase do they usually do, total gross income, if they adjust from year to year. Do you guys know? Or?
So for tonight's agenda, on item 5.5, we will actually be talking about adjustments to the rate and charges, and we'll actually be talking about the amount. So you are definitely welcome to stay and listen to our discussion and our plan.
Yeah.
And provide comment at that time.
Yeah. So I guess to preview a little bit that item, I think staff did not come with a specific Help on Tap proposal for this evening, and we wanted to hear the feedback from the board on what your interests were. Certainly, if you were looking for some feedback that would address a case such as this one, we have some ideas of how we might be able to do that.
Okay. So you're definitely welcome to stay because the board as a whole needs to discuss this issue in the public.
Okay.
So it's right now it's under item 5.5. We do have a few items before that.
Okay.
So if you have time, please stay
Yeah,
and join the discussion. We really would appreciate your comments.
So you have no idea how much of an increase is from year to year yet, or?
In terms of the assistance amount, the amount is set by the board, and we as a board need to talk about it, and that's what we're going to talk about tonight. So please stay and help us out with your comments, and we definitely appreciate your input.
Okay.
Thank you. All right. Sorry for sidetracking the board. My apologies. All right. So with that, do we have any other members of the public that wish to address the board? If not, let's move on to a special presentation. Do you have an introduction for this?
Yeah, just real quick, Treasurer Huang and members of the board. We have a special presentation tonight. We have Ms. Joan Malloy, the current city manager of Union City, who I believe took her position in July of this last year. So I just want to welcome her, and she's here to introduce herself and some of the activities going on in the city.
Thank you.
Good evening, and thank you for allowing me to be here. I also want to introduce Lauren Sagayan. She's our communications manager and one of the leading staff members that's helping the city implement its 5-year strategic plan. I am here this evening to talk to you a little bit about what's going on in Union City, and at the top of that agenda is our 5-year strategic plan. Our council undertook this ambitious effort last year in 2019 and established essentially the goals and objectives for the next 5 years. And tonight I'm going to talk broadly about the strategic plan and a little bit more specifically about where staff is spending their time and attention on the priorities of the council in the next couple of years. So as most strategic plans do, they start out with mission, vision, and or vision, mission, and values. And Union City's vision statement is to be a vibrant, inclusive, and prosperous community where residents, businesses can thrive and innovation grows. We're a very diverse community, not only in our residential makeup, but also in our business foundation and the broad diversity of businesses we have. And we're looking at growing both our population and our economic base of our business community. The council, I think, was also very smart in recognizing while there is a community vision to address the public face of Union City and the community, there's also an organizational vision, which has to do with the city government and the employees. And the vision for the government or the internal organization side was to foster an environment where city employees are inspired, recognized, and thrive. And the council, I think, is very smart in looking at their primary resource as a service agency and acknowledging that it is their workforce that interface with the community every day. As a mission statement, similar to Alameda County Water District, we are, at our core, a service agency providing service to the public. And so our mission statement is to create and provide effective, quality services that foster a high quality of life and economic vitality. Again, the business climate in Union City is a priority. And lastly, the city, when it undertook its strategic plan, incorporated the employees extensively into this process. And through several workshops and through several surveys and several levels of engagement, the employees determine, and this is employee-driven, the values that they see are important to the workforce. And those are sustainability, integrity, professionalism, and accountability. And it always, every time I give this presentation and I show this slide, I feel very proud of the employees in Union City for identifying these as the values. I'm going to talk now briefly about the multi-year goals. These are the broad goals that oversee the entire strategic plan. Then I'm going to talk a little bit about what our priorities are out of those goals. Number one is to foster fiscal health through a disciplined long-term planning, cost control, efficiencies, revenue, increase and cost recovery. And as a sister agency, you are probably very familiar with these budgeting issues. Number 2, governance and organization effectiveness. This gets back to what I mentioned earlier in terms of the internal organizational vision, but is to produce high-quality services to the community through a commitment of local government best practices and employee development. And you'll see this trickling down, again, through the city's priorities. Next is a very broad goal that has to do with our everyday operations, economic, community development, and public safety, but is to have a forward-thinking view and to look at how we can promote community growth and innovation in all of our activities. Business, again, economic development is important. Business, land use development, housing, social services, public safety, our police and fire, and other strategies that we engage with every day. Environmental sustainability and infrastructure, it is on the forefront of every agency, I think. It's in Union City. Not only does it come up from our citizenry, as well as priority for the state. So the goal is to create a healthy, sustainable community and maintain and improve our city's infrastructure. Our Public Works Department is on the leading edge of this because they are so much involved in the operation of the city in terms of greening our fleet, being more conservation-minded in the use of water, as was mentioned a little bit earlier, and how we use our resources, as well as our facilities and how energy efficient our facilities are. And lastly, of utmost importance is our communication and outreach. Here I am this evening. You can have the best strategic plan in the world, but if you cannot communicate what the plan is about, you cannot build the support and understanding to carry the communication out, the strategic plan out. So at one end we have this fiscally strong goal that Union City is striving for, and at the other end communication, and everything is kind of bound in between. I'm going to talk briefly about the City Council priorities for the next couple of years, and at the top of that list, again, is our fiscal stability and sustainability. Union City has a long-term structural deficit, and we are working very hard to bring into alignment the services that we provide to our citizenry and our staffing, and looking at how we can be more cost-effective, efficient, and also, again, build our economic base. As part of this effort, we are seeking from our voters to reauthorize our public safety parcel tax. It's going up to our voters in March, and it's essentially an extension, slight increase, $168 for our most common parcel in Union City, 8-year term. We are hopeful that our voters will support the public safety parcel tax, but we don't take anything for granted, and I'll tell you how things are on March 4th, the day after. Reducing costs associated with the city's fire contract in Alameda County. You may have heard about this. It has received some press. Union City has been looking at tightening its operations across public safety, our police department. It's impacted our public works department and even our core city services. We're now having to look outside at our contracting agencies, Alameda County Fire Department. The council, I think, after looking at data, determined that one of our fire stations was underutilized, had 1.7 calls a day, and many of those calls were going to the city of Newark. They determined, and I think this was a very brave decision, determined that the city could use those resources more effectively, more cost effectively in another manner, and so we are moving towards closing Fire Station 30, which is at the boundary of Union City and Fremont on Union City Boulevard. Again, looking back to the original goals, establishing professional development plans for each employee. I think I was just speaking a little bit earlier with Mr. Stevenson about an episode we had earlier this year with a water main break on Union City Boulevard. I think we learned a lot from that, and I think we learned we could all do better with more training and more staff development. This not only addresses emergency operation systems, but also internally what are staff's personal goals and how do they see themselves developing through the agency. So this, again, is a professional development program that we're putting in place immediately, rolled out last week. We are also, this is throughout the county, you know, homelessness is a big topic among many cities. And so similarly, our council is very focused on this and is asking staff to do more work in addressing the homelessness issues in Union City. A very important economic development goal is the build-out of our station district. I know that through our general plan and through the planning efforts and working with Alameda County Water District, you're well aware of the city's vision. Part of this includes building backbone infrastructure and access through Quarry Lakes Parkway, upgrading our BART station to be a two-sided BART station for transit-oriented development, and completing rail crossings and some other development activities to really set the table for future growth and development. It is a key economic development area. It is also very important to our housing element. We see it as an area that will be growing extensively over the next 10 to 20 years. Lastly, is going again back to our goals, the whole communication effort that the council has identified as being important to our strategic plan. Again, as a strategy, we are reaching out to our sister agencies, reaching out to community groups, our commissions, the school board, sharing our strategic plan with them. I believe we brought strategic plans for Alameda County Water District for your board to take a look at if you want to dive deeper into it. And to really share the information of the goals and strategies that the council is implementing for the next 5 years, but really targeting the next 2. That concludes my presentation. I'm happy to answer any questions on the strategic plan or any questions you may have about Union City.
Do I have questions on the directors?
I have
Director
a couple.
Sethy?
I have a couple. Thank you, Ms. Malloy, for coming here and presenting tonight. We really appreciate it, getting an update on Union City. So I would like to raise 2 issues, not necessarily concerns, but to get your feedback. Mm-hmm. So ACWD is embarking on quite a main renewal program after being the oldest county water district in the state of California, 106 years now going on. And so this is going to be very disruptive to some of our Tri-City area. And at the top of our list is the main renewal, which is 5 miles along Niles Alvarado from the overpass at BART all the way through Union City out to Kaiser Permanente. So we have to do a lot of coordination over the next couple of years to make sure that we, along with Union Sanitary District, which has pipelines there too, and other utilities, that we coordinate with all of our staffs so that we don't further disrupt the tight transportation around Union City. And so I'm looking forward to your cooperation on that so we can expedite getting permits done. We can do weekend work, we can do nighttime work, all that kind of stuff to relieve the stress on your citizens in your community.
Right, during school hours.
Yeah.
For example. Yes, we have been, Alameda County Water District staff has been working with Union City for, I would say, a couple years now, essentially explaining the project and their plans. And I believe they're working with them currently in getting the permits. I'm looking over to Mr. Stevenson.
Yeah, that's right. And in fact, Ms. Malloy and I were discussing before the board meeting. Union City has been very, very cooperative and very, very helpful as we've sort of jointly developed much of the details of the project. And in fact, it's currently advertised for bid. And so we're looking forward to getting started, and there will be some struggles along the way for sure. It's going to be a very difficult project, but we're looking forward to working with Union City to get it completed.
Great. And the second issue is, I'm not sure if I'm articulating this properly, but we have the issue of the bypass over to Quarry Lakes. That
Quarry Lakes Parkway.
From Dakota through over to Quarry Lakes, and trying to clear up all the traffic patterns there. ACWD has land ownership in that area along the old Alameda Creek.
Yes, it does.
And so I know there's a lot of controversy in Union City, and Director Gunther is a resident of Union City. Do we have any further clarification on where the council is headed on that issue?
Yeah, yes, first to just address your first point, you're absolutely correct. Alameda County Water District owns a remnant parcel, well, a small parcel, perhaps not remnant, but a parcel that is landlocked, and the Quarry Lakes roadway, as it has been historically identified, would open up access to that property. We are working through some details that Alameda County Transportation Commission has asked Union City to do, and we'll be returning back to Alameda County Transportation Commission to seek additional funding to continue to build out the project. It is a critical backbone infrastructure piece to see the successful build out of the transit-oriented development and the development of housing and businesses in that area. It's about 200 or so acres. You know, we're otherwise a fully built out city, and so redevelopment of interior properties is really our way of developing over the next 20 to 40 years. So we are moving ahead with that project, and we'll be reporting back to Alameda County Transportation Commission likely in the next 6 months.
And where is the council standing right now on this?
The council fully supports the Quarry Lakes Parkway. As I mentioned, it is really critical infrastructure to see the development around BART be fully successful. Right now, essentially the Station District loads off of Dakota Road. It's already a heavily impacted road. There are a lot of plans to turn that into a bus corridor through Alameda County. There's several projects. The character of Dakota Road is going to be more congested and slower than it is today, and we really need another source. It's a Quarry Lakes Parkway. It is a multimodal roadway. It will have Class 4 and a Class 1 trail system for bicycle and pedestrians, as well as vehicle access. It's also critical for public safety. It's a fully grade-separated roadway. Right now, the only way police and fire can get into that area is on Dakota Road, which is all at grade, crosses 2 railroad tracks. I could talk more about it, but it is very important to really see that area develop.
Well, thank you for that insight there. Lastly, I would like to inform you, you may not be aware of this, but we have an Alameda County Countywide Oversight Board that was that is responsible for all the disillusionment of the former redevelopment agencies for the cities and their obligation payments back to the special districts, the hospital districts, the school districts, everything else. So I am the representative for all of the special districts in Alameda County.
Oh, okay.
And Director Weed is the alternate for the Alameda County Special Districts Association. And we have our meeting later this month on January 22nd up in Oakland. I just wanted to make citizens aware, especially in Union City, that Union City has cleared all of its obligations to the special districts and other hospital districts, school districts, everything else. So we are in gratitude for you executing very well on that.
Well, thank you. I appreciate hearing that. I will say I was very disappointed when the state dissolved redevelopment agencies because it was a key source of funding that allowed us to do so much around our BART station. And if you ever have an opportunity to go see what we've done, cleaning up over 90 acres of essentially brownfield land, cleaning up a PG&E site, building over 1,000 units of housing, it was instrumental in allowing us to do that. And because this is just an interesting fact that maybe you would appreciate, because the land value in that area was negative, meaning that to get it to a level of development, the investment was so high, it had a negative land value, it was worth zero, nothing on the tax rolls. With the effort that Union City has done through its redevelopment agency, there's now been billions. I think the land values are in the billions, 2-3 billion, which has elevated the property tax rolls, and the county has been a tremendous beneficiary of it. So they're one of the biggest property tax recipients. So it's something we're proud of.
Right, and finally, I have a request for your consideration, which I keep bringing up annually. I have been the representative for the district the last 10 years for the Tri-City GIS information system.
Yes.
And when we first formed in the early 2000s, we had all of the special districts and Union City, all the 3 cities involved as well. And when we went through the Great Recession, Union City dropped out for budgetary reasons. Yes. And I have asked our staff and in our meetings, our annual meetings of the Tri-City GIS, to see if we can try to pull Union City back in, because this is such a valuable asset for all 3 of our communities, especially since we all lie on the Hayward Fault.
Yes. And
in case of a major quake, we need to coordinate with one another. Mm-hmm. And it is a budget matter that it's less than $10,000 a year for Union City to participate, re-engage as one of the original members of the Tri-City GIS. And I would ask you, please, to reconsider this and talk to your staff about it.
I thank you for that information, and if I might have the contact name that I can follow up with at the City GIS.
Yeah, I think Mr. Stevenson can provide that.
Yeah, you can start with Ed Stevenson at ACWD, and then we'll get the right people.
Thank you.
Yeah, but I've been every year. I'm trying to encourage Union City to re-engage. It's so important that we have you in the Tri-City GIS system.
Thank you.
Director Wee?
Yes, well, thank you. Director Sethy picked up on a comment that I was going to make relating to the GIS. As a public utility trying to operate in 3 cities, it's best to have a uniform database to work with. And also, particularly in a contingency situation, it's a great tool for communicating with the community. So hopefully we can do that. Next, where do you stand on small cell cellular? I know the city of Fremont this Tuesday is going to have a master's license agreement. We're looking at AMI, automated meter reading, which could potentially be utilizing, could utilize different sources of communication. But that is the one of the future. And is there any effort on the part of Union City to develop a small cell or to coordinate it with the other 2 cities, of the Tri-Cities?
We have not coordinated with the other 2 cities, but we do have a master agreement for small cell sites, and that's been in place for quite some time. I think it's been hampered by the FCC ruling. A lot of the commercial cell operators are waiting to see where that fully lands. But we do actually have a master agreement. And if you're moving towards, are you indicating that you're going to want to put in small cell?
We don't. That determination is yet to be made. We're in the RFP stage now. The quotations are coming in. They're being evaluated. But it would be, that is one of the mechanisms for communicating with the with the community.
Would
It's
be
a two-way.
commercial sites, or would you be using
every
commercial?
meter in the community, every water meter in your
Right. But would you be using the commercial cell sites for this meter reading, or would you
That
have
is
your
one of
separate?
the options, or you
One of
build
the
your own
options. Very good.
independent system.
Right. But we do actually have a master agreement in place.
Okay, thank you. And in the past, I think it's been addressed basically now, is the uniformity of the requirements for street repair after we do repair in the streets. At one time, Union City had requirements that were well beyond those of the other neighboring cities. As we can get keeping an eye on that and ideally making them uniform so we can have one standard budget item to, when we do a repair, know how much repair work on the surface street needs to be done would be helpful.
Thank you. I'll talk to our Public Works about that. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Wee. Director Gunther?
Obviously, I have a few comments. Yes, I would like to say that as a citizen over there off of Dow, I really love the city. It's great. You guys are doing a great job. I don't come down to council very often because I don't have a reason to come down to council. I'm very happy. I am supporting the Measure U. And I can't remember. I talked to Carol a couple weeks ago on that and said absolutely. So, in fact, I haven't got a sign yet, but they're supposed to be coming out. Staff is very well aware that I do drive on Alvarado Niles, and that the mayor, her business office, and actually resident is very close to the Smith Street side, I believe. So our staff is definitely very aware that I will be watching that project. I missed the night they were over there discussing that. I wanted to come down and let the staff and the council know that that project is very near and dear to my heart. I live on the flight path of Chavez. And that's okay. I mean, I'm okay with that, the fact that there are periods of time when my street is busy. I've been on Alvarado Niles when Logan lets out, when Chavez lets out, Kitayama, and so I'm fully aware what that street looks like, and I've already conveyed that to staff. I'm sure they'll let you know that. But we will work very closely with the city on that. It's really going to be a great benefit for us.
Oh, we completely understand the need. Absolutely.
When the people are coming, when the complaints come in, you can tell them that there's a director who's sitting in the same traffic they are. And I do drive it almost daily. So I just wanted to let you know that I am watching and I am suffering, will be suffering with everybody else. And it's going to be kicking myself as I go down the street. But our contractor, I think, is going to be aware, too, that I will be suffering. So we have eyes. And the city will have eyes over there as a resident. But I want to let you know, I really like it over there. I do agree with Director Sethy on GIS. I would really love to see the city come back. I think it would be a benefit to the city. I understand financials are difficult, but I think this one would benefit, and I'm sure our staff would work with your engineering staff to whatever you need to find out to get back in. I really think it'd be benefit. And so I really appreciate your coming down here tonight and getting an opportunity to meet you. Like I said, I don't come down to council because I don't have to. So I don't know if that says much about the city, but yes, I am happy about it. It's not, I don't see, I mean, we have certainly issues over there, but we're doing fine. You're doing good. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Director Akbari?
No particular questions, but we appreciate you coming down here. And actually, maybe I'll ask one question. So I noticed in here that in your strategic plan that you guys are moving to district council seats.
Yeah.
And of course, that is a hot topic with any agency. I was curious, what considerations you'll be making to determine how this
That
district?
actually is completed. We
Okay.
completed that late last year in 2019. So our first district election will be in 2020. It's District Number 1 that will be electing a new council member. Yeah.
Okay. Well, yeah, that was the only thing that kind of popped up.
So I just want to say thank you, Ms. Malloy, for working so closely with ACWD, and hopefully we can keep on working cooperatively together and get our projects done.
Yes.
And thank you for taking the time today.
You're welcome. And
President Wong, may I bring up one other thing?
Of course.
Ms. Malloy, I'm a little bit of a historian for the water district.
yes.
My father was an engineer here beginning in the early 60s. And for your reference, when you look at the Apian tank that we have up on top of Seven Hills,
Yes.
our water tank there, that was my father's original design that he worked on. And
You did some repairs to it or improvements to it recently.
we replaced it.
You replaced it.
As
I
the
remember
president of the
project,
board in
yeah.
2014, I had to sign the papers to destroy the tank that my dad designed, and then put a seismically safe tank up there.
And improve the roadway.
Right,
and
and
stuff.
it's
yeah.
I believe it's a 500,000 gallon tank.
Yeah, 3/4 of a million.
3/4, okay. So that supplies a lot of the Union City area and protects the hills and the community there.
Yes.
And I remember going up there with my dad when he was just surveying the land. I was preschool a month before President Kennedy was assassinated. And I also, with a lot of sadness, remember as an early teenager the purposeful assassination of the police chief of Union City.
William Cann.
Mr. McCann,
Yes.
right. And he was a man that I had met with my parents as a very young person, and that assassination has always lived with me throughout my life. It's the one community assassination in our Tri-City area that is just, it's unforgivable, and it brings shudders down my spine every time I think about it. But every time I pass the police building, I always remember him in honor.
Yeah. Well, thank you for recognizing that, and I think Union City has made great strides since that time, and we have much to be proud of now.
Yeah, I'm glad the police station is named after him.
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Thank
so
you.
I think with that, seeing no more comments, thank
you very
for
much.
coming.
Thank you.
All right, with that, shall we move on? So next is the consent calendar. Do I have any motion to add items to the consent calendar?
I'll make the motion to add items 5.1 to 5.3 to the consent calendar.
I'll second.
Directors Akbari,
Aye.
Gunther,
Aye.
Sethy,
Aye.
Weed,
Aye.
and Huang.
Aye. Do I have a motion to adopt the consent calendar as amended?
I'll move the motion for the consent calendar as amended.
I'll second.
Directors Akbari,
Aye.
Gunther,
Aye.
Sethy,
Aye.
Weed,
Aye.
and Huang.
Aye. So let's move on to item 5.4, I believe.
Yes, and we have a resolution tonight to approve the updated statement of investment policy. And I'll turn it over to our Manager of Finance, John Wanderley.
All right, thank you, Mr. Ahrens. The investment of public funds is governed by the California Government Code, which specifies the types of investments permitted, the maximum maturity for those investments, and identifies investment objectives as well as reporting requirements. The Board of Directors reviews the investment policy annually and last reviewed the district statement of investment policy June 13th of 2019. Staff recently completed a comprehensive review of the investment policy with our new investment portfolio manager, Chandler Asset Management, and recommends updates to the policy. Proposed revisions were reviewed with the Finance Committee on December 17th, 2019, and Carlos Oblitas is here from Chandler Asset Management to supplement this report with the presentation. And approval of this item will help meet our strategic plan goal 3, improve the district's financial stability and transparency. At the conclusion of the presentation, there is a recommended action on this item, and that is by motion, adopt a resolution approving an updated statement of investment policy. So I'll turn it over to Ms. Troplidis for the presentation.
Thank you very much. Directors, thank you so much for inviting me here tonight to bring you up to date on our activity on the investment policy. As your finance director stated, we worked very closely with staff once we were hired to begin a comprehensive review of the investment policy. We keep track of changes to California government code as they come about every year. Oftentimes we're actually consulted by various parties and groups when new legislation is proposed, and this is one of the things that we feel is very important to stay on top of for our clients. Working with staff, we did go through and identify, just reviewed everything and identified areas that we could enhance the policy from a governance standpoint and some asset classes, make sure that there were some recent changes to code that were included, as well as just from a strategic standpoint, some changes to maturities, and I'd like to go over them very briefly. You have a presentation before you, but please, if you have any questions, please feel free to stop and ask. Our review focused on two major things. On number one, compliance with California government code, and secondly, on inclusion of best practices as recognized by various state groups such as the California Society of Municipal Finance Officers, the Government Finance Officers Association, and the Association of Public Treasurers of the United States and Canada. By looking at your policy, as we began, the policy was robust as it was. And for that reason, when we were engaged and worked with staff to develop a strategy, we were able to go ahead and step in and begin investing the funds using the current policy as is. We really focused, the biggest changes came through from governance, as I mentioned, and then from making an inclusion of all asset classes available to you by California government code so that we're able to better diversify the portfolio. I will tell you that most of the recommended governance language that we placed in there already included, or I should say it encapsulated, a lot of the practices that your staff was already implementing. We like to see language that addresses very specific areas of governance. It's a good thing to recognize it on paper. You're enshrining it in your policy, but it was already going on internally. It addressed ethics and conflicts of interest. There was language that we added to provide tighter concentration limits than what code provides. We enhanced an area over prohibited investments to make it very clear the types of investments that we would avoid. Additionally, we added some language that addressed credit risk and market risk and their management. And then, of course, some language just stating that the portfolio will be evaluated regularly. From expanding the securities, we wanted to include asset-backed securities as well as supranational securities. These asset classes, and thirdly, we also extended the maturities out to 10 years on those asset classes that are allowed by code, and I'll explain that in just a moment. Supranational securities are a new asset class to California government code as of 2014. It's been around for a long time, but generally speaking, you know them as World Bank bonds. In 2014, the county treasurer tax collectors were seeing that the federal agency sector of the bond markets was diminishing, issuance was diminishing, and they were looking for other safe places to be able to invest their cash, and they turned to supranational securities. The code was changed to include three very specific entities of the World Bank. They're the Inter-American Development Bank, International Bank of Reconstruction and Development, and the International Finance Corporation. Those are the only three that are allowed. They are all domiciled in Washington, D.C. Their bonds are dollar denominated, and they're currently rated at AAA. So they're very, very safe investment. Generally speaking, they're considered very safe. We may or may not purchase any immediately. It depends on the opportunities that we observe in the markets as to their relative yield versus other assets or other sectors, but we do want them in there in case that there comes an opportunity where we can enhance portfolio value. With asset-backed securities, these are securities that are backed by pools of receivables. So for example, if you're a bank and you lend out money for auto loans, generally the banks don't wait for that money over the 4 or 5 year loan period. They will go through a process called securitization. They will bundle a lot of similar debt, just all these loans they make, and they spin them off their balance sheet into a separate trust. And what they'll do is they'll issue bonds to be able to pay off the bank, and then the investors buy those bonds. So, for example, the city might buy a bond like this, and the payments to the city of interest and principal are coming from the debtors in that pool paying down their debt. This is a sector that actually, through the downturn in 2008, actually performed quite well. We specialize in really analyzing the risks associated with this particular sector. We look for the issues that are very, generally they're tiered by credit quality and by cash flows coming into the trust. We look for the highest tier, making sure that they're liquid, that they're high credit quality, and more importantly, that they have credit enhancements behind them. Oftentimes they will be backed by an additional line of credit from a bank, or they'll be over-collateralized where they'll borrow less than what's actually the assets in the pool. So there's various things that we do to make sure that they're safe. We believe that this is a safe way for the district to be able to further diversify its investments, maintain them liquid, and enhance its return. These will mostly, in your portfolio, will take the form of auto loans and credit cards. And then the changes to maturity. Upon doing our analysis of your current portfolio and your policy and the cash flow analysis, one of the things that we identified with staff's help is that you have projects that have long-term periods that may take, they may be developed over long-term periods, and also liabilities which may stretch out well beyond the 5-year limit of California Government Code. California Government Code lists maximum maturities for every asset class that they allow, except for treasuries, federal agencies, municipal securities, and negotiable certificates of deposit. And for those, they're silent. And then there's another section in the code that says anywhere where we're silent about the maximum maturity, we put a 5-year limit unless there's express permission from the governing body that to go out beyond those 5 years. So this is a provision that we're recommending along with staff that you include because it would provide you the opportunity to be able to match assets to longer liabilities. You'll also see some differentials in yields out in those ranges, and we'd like to be able to take advantage of them for specific purposes, for specific funds of monies, and also during specific times when the markets provide those advantages. Code basically has no limits on those. We're recommending out to 10 years, and we came up with that working with staff. So let me pause there, and maybe I can summarize it. The key things are new governance language, just encapsulating what's already happening. 3 new asset classes that we're recommending you include. I think it was 2. Sorry, it's the asset-backed and the supranational, so it's 2 asset classes. And then and the inclusion of that 10-year limit on those securities where you're allowed to invest beyond the 5 years. Let me stop with that and answer any questions that you may have.
Questions? Director Wee?
Could you comment on the changes to the benchmark that you're proposing?
Absolutely. One of the things that staff tasked us with was to look at the way that the investments are being structured, the strategy that's being developed, and find an appropriate benchmark that addresses the risk characteristics and the return characteristics of the portfolio. Currently, you're following an industry benchmark, which is the ICE B of A Merrill Lynch 1 to 5 year Treasury Index. Effectively, it's a universe of treasuries, all treasuries between 1 and 5 years. However, your portfolio comprises a lot of different types of securities beyond Treasury securities. So that may be a little bit of a mismatch. So one of the things that we're exploring is using a Treasury agency benchmark and also looking at benchmarks that include a corporate credit component so that we can better measure that risk profile of the portfolio versus the market.
I suggest it was a significant mismatch if you looked at our portfolio ratios.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Any other comments from directors?
Yeah, I have a comment
Director
here.
Sethy?
So I want to just say I appreciated the very thorough review you gave to the Finance Committee last month. That was very much appreciated. But I also want to note for the board and the public that, your agency is new to us right now. And as I expressed in the last meeting, it was an opportunity to kind of give us a thorough check through our system. And I was delighted that we had no serious issues that we had to resolve in your final report to the board. In past years, a decade ago, we had quite a few issues we had to resolve. I appreciate all of the work that you're doing and the new insights that you have offered to us. It's very refreshing to hear all of the new ideas and approaches to investing, those kind of things. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Any other questions or comments? Nothing? No? All right, with that, then I think it's up for motion.
Correct.
Go ahead and
Do
move
I have a
staff
motion?
recommendation.
Second.
Okay, so Director Gunther make the motion, Director Sethy second.
Directors Akbari,
Aye.
Gunther,
Aye.
Sethy,
Aye.
Weed,
Aye.
and Huang.
Aye. Thank you for coming.
Thank you, directors. Good night.
Good night. So I think we're on to item 5.5.
Yes. Good evening. This resolution approving revised miscellaneous fees and charges and updating the district's rate and fee schedule. And again, Mr. Wanderley will lead this item.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Ahrens. The district annually conducts a review of various fees and charges and revises them as appropriate to cover the cost of providing the service for which the fee or charge is imposed. And so staff recently completed such a review, and based on that review, recommends revisions to some of our various fees and charges. Presented this evening and included in the resolution are only the charges for which changes are recommended. We also recommend revising the rate and fee schedule to add conservation program rebate information and to update connection charge information. The proposed changes were reviewed at the December 17th, 2019 Finance Committee meeting, and this report will be supplemented by a staff presentation. Approval of this item will help the district achieve its strategic plan goal 3, improve the district's financial stability and transparency. Also handed out to you and with copies on the back table is an updated resolution with one minor change from what is in the board packet, and that is to one of the rebate, conservation rebate items to correct the information that the rebate is per controller rather than station. And so with that clarification, once we get to the conclusion of the presentation this evening, the recommendation is by motion, adopt a resolution approving revised miscellaneous fees and charges and updating the district's rate and fee schedule, and finding that the amendments are exempt from the California Environmental Quality Act. And so with that overview, I will turn it over to our Supervising Financial Analyst, Mr. Aum, to provide a brief presentation. Now, not included in his presentation is help on tap because we are not specifically recommending any changes, but of course, we are prepared to discuss the program and hear feedback from the board on any changes you may wish to make.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Wanderley. Good evening, President Wong and members of the board. I'm Sidney Aum, Supervising Financial Analyst. I will give you a very quick presentation on this item tonight. It is approving the revised miscellaneous fees and charges and updating our fees and rates, rate and fee schedule. The revisions is consistent with the mission of ACWD. So as Mr. Wanderley mentioned earlier, the district annually revised various fees and charges, and we update them to reflect the cost of providing the service. We are not allowed to charge more than the cost of providing the service. As a result of the review, staff recommends revisions to a number of fees and charges. The table on this slide shows the changes for the administrative charges, the changes for them. I wanted to point out a couple of the items on the chart. The after-hours connection charge,
and the after-hour reconnection charge are set by SB 998 at a maximum of $150. Our current rate right now is $190, so that is a reduction of approximately 21%. As for the meter installation charges, again, the fees is based on the full cost of installation, the meter, and equipment. After reviewing the cost with looking at the labor, staff is proposing to increase the cost of installation for the 3/4-inch meter at approximately 3.9%. We are not proposing to any changes for the 1-inch meter. For the 1.5-inch meter, there's a proposal to actually decrease that charge by approximately 2%.
Could I ask on that? Are we now at a standardized 3/4 inch, and that includes the 5/8 inch meter?
That is correct. Am I correct to say that?
Yeah, we don't, I believe we don't typically actually use 5/8 inch meters anymore. So this would be just a 3/4 inch meter. But when it comes to our typical service charges, we treat the 5/8 and 3/4 the same.
That'll be interesting. A side point here is that the AWWA standards for 5/8 to 3/4 inch meters has a accurate flow meter reading which excludes positive displacement meters and requires that you go to pulse technology. So hopefully we can take that into account when we do our AMI review.
Yeah, I don't think we install a lot of new 3/4 inch meters. The standard for new residential construction is usually a 1-inch meter, so there's sufficient capacity for fire flows.
Right, so that will have, my concern was, it relates to a separate issue, which is AMI, but I would ask us to look at the AWWA standards to make sure that the RFP that we put out that allowed our people to bid on positive displacement would not meet that standard of AWWA for this size of meter.
So there's a proposed for a modest increase in the fire hydrant meter charges and inspection testing backflow prevention device. But the deposit increase is only a few dollars. For the electric vehicle charging fees, staff is proposing to decrease that by approximately 9% from the current fee of $1.65 down to $1.50. In fiscal year 2018-19, the fees produced approximately $1,700 in revenue. As Mr. Wanderley mentioned earlier, staff is proposing to add the water conservation rebates program into the fee schedule. There are no proposed changes. I want to point out in the staff report, there's a typo in there on the last item, the weather-based irrigation controllers under the proposed. It should read $30 per active station, not per controller. Just want to point out the clarification. Adding this information to the rate and fee schedule will improve transparency by formally establishing the rebate amounts that are offered in the district's water conservation program. Also combining all the customer fees and rebates into one schedule. This way, it requires public action to update this amount in the future. The water consumption and fixed charges are scheduled to increase by 4% effective March 1, 2020. These increases were previously approved by the board. Customers are notified through the message in the water bills. And we will be publishing the ACWD Aqueduct, and the rate notice will be in the Aqueduct newsletter as well. For the outside customer, we have approximately 17 of them. We also send them a letter notifying of the increase. As for the facility connection charges, the board had approved the 5-year phase-in So we are proposing to increase the 2020 fees by 2.5% based on the changes in the engineering news record construction cost index. From July to the July of last year, it is approximately 2.5%. Again, the board approved these in February 2019. Again, notices were sent out in the developer letter in December. That concludes my brief presentation, and I will turn it back to Mr. Wanderley.
So at this point, we're just prepared to receive any feedback the board may have or engage in discussion on the Help on Tap program.
All right, do I have any questions from the board? Comments? If not,
I'll save it for the committee when we have a chance to work through in detail.
All right, Director Sethy?
I concurred with all the recommendations of staff here in the Finance Committee review, but I would still like to encourage staff to look at ways where we can expand the Help on Tap program. And I understand what some of the limitations are, but I would ask that we sincerely look at ways to make it a more robust program that covers more people, and especially take a look at elevating the minimum requirement so that we can expand it to more people.
If I could follow up, I support that concept. We have the cash available to help these programs, part of which is the dysfunctional rate structure we have, which is overcharges for commodities. So it compounds the problem. But the other concern I have is on the program itself as we get into it in some of the presentations. At one time, when we started the Help on Tap discussion, it was indicated that we would not be getting involved in certifying applicants ourselves, but we would rely on a third-party certification. That was modified, and we're doing it ourselves. My belief is that we're spending more money administering Help on Tap than we're actually distributing to the ratepayers. It's a relatively expensive program to operate, particularly since we're doing our own certification of the individuals that are necessary to receive the assistance. So I'll throw that out for further response.
Yeah, and a further comment, addressing the couple that's here tonight. I took your comments from the last meeting. I heard loud and clear what you were expressing. So I brought those to our Finance Committee meeting last month so that we could have a discussion on that. And if you'd like to come up to the podium and talk about your issue again, I was trying to get clarification from our staff on how we can perhaps modify our program to better address the circumstances of folks like yourself.
So, ma'am, if I may, before you start, I omitted to ask you to introduce yourself and state your city of residence, if you would.
Oh, okay. My name is Indrajit Sahota, and I live in Fremont.
Thank you. So I think we could definitely incorporate our comments from the public session into the record for this particular item. So do you have any additional comments that you wish to address the board?
Well, I was mainly concerned that they don't take all circumstances of what could affect the total gross income. In our case, it's not where it's everywhere else with the employee situation. So the total gross income is inflated without really being there, and whereas regular employee is not. So that was my concern, for that fact.
Okay.
So if they can make some kind of adjustment or exception to that fact, how it's inflated, and that's not the actual true total gross income.
All right. So Director Sethy, do you have additional comments or questions?
I just think that, on a case-by-case basis, when somebody makes an appeal to the board, we need to take a close look at it. And view their circumstances, and I believe this is one of them.
Yeah, because when I was talking to the original person that's in charge, I was trying to explain to them that this doesn't happen all the time, and our circumstances is really different than what I was talking to a couple of the people here. They said they were not aware that that's how the county distinguishes whether you're a regular employee or retired, which it doesn't really make a difference, really, when it comes to total income.
Yeah, and we do have a process where the general manager can review a specific circumstance, and you can appeal. We don't normally appeal to the board, but there's an appeal process through our finance customer service department and up to the general manager. So I would just ask our staff to be, a little bit courteous in recognizing some of the special needs in our community.
So I am going to chime in because I thought I heard earlier from our finance manager, maybe you have a proposal for us?
Yeah, so I guess if I could just, try to address some of the comments. Director, we did make a comment about our administrative costs. We have one staff person who spends a fraction of his time on this. I do think the money we provide to customers is probably about 5 times the amount we spend in administrative costs, but we do not track it that tightly. So I would say right now it's not a large administrative burden. In regards to the appeals process to the general manager, staff's interpretation of the rate and fee schedule is that's restricted to leak adjustments or unexplained consumption. We don't view, as it's currently written, that we have flexibility on help on tap eligibility standards, which is set at 200% of the federal poverty level. Because it's set at the federal poverty level, it adjusts up slightly every year when the federal government publishes new guidelines. Having said that, there are a number of assistance programs out there that are based on different income levels. 200% is the same as PG&E's program. I believe that's why we probably originally set it at that level to match what most other water districts and what PG&E do. There are some other programs. One is the state's Children Health Insurance Program is set at 250% of the federal poverty level. There are also housing programs that are based on a percentage of median income. And so in a county like Alameda, where the median income is maybe higher than other places, that correlates to higher cost of living, so they provide a higher threshold for some of those programs. I think if there were interest in making help on tap available to more customers, one of the challenges we have is that we just do not have good data on how many customers there are at the next levels, because the Census Bureau does provide reporting at the 200% level, but not above there. So if we were to look at something, I might suggest something like an incremental adjustment to say 250%. That would match the state's Children's Health Insurance Program, would probably help a number of the customers we see that are just above the level. I believe the customer we have here this evening, it would address her situation. Based on what I've heard, I believe an increase to 250% would cover you.
I would be entirely enthusiastic about supporting that route.
And I would be somewhat hesitant to suggest that we that we disregard certain types of expenses from somebody's income. I think that would be difficult to manage. What types of expenses are we going to not include? I think a lot of customers can make a strong argument on different types of medical or other necessary expenses. So instead, I would suggest that we address that primarily through perhaps a modest increase in the income threshold. And I believe that would cover you if we were to increase it to 250%.
Any comments? If not, I will go.
But in case it doesn't, you should have some kind of exception to certain things that doesn't apply to everybody, but only like for our situation.
Mr. Birch has reviewed your case with me, and I feel pretty confident in saying you would be covered if we increase the limit to 250%.
Because like you were saying, you have to appeal this, and I was trying to appeal, but they say you have to take it up with the board first before they even accept appeal of any type.
I would say this to you. Please tell your neighbors it's worth coming down to the water board, to the water district to report your concerns.
I think
It's well worth coming down here.
I think
We appreciate you talking to us about it.
the way to address this, we always hear you, and perhaps we cannot address the problem the way you want us to because of constraints we have as a water district and trying to enforce the requirements. But normally we find a way to address it, or at least answer your question or address your concerns, perhaps not the way you want it, but we will resolve the problem. And I think this is what you're kind of seeing where the board is going, because we are bounded by certain requirements to be fair and to set up very clear rules. And we definitely hear you that there are things that are unfair, but we'll try to do our best. And I think we have heard the proposal that's on the table. If the board chooses to go that way, we'll perhaps solve your problem for you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. But I should be able to appeal, though, other than just coming to the board. I should be able to appeal and present.
And I think that's an interesting point that we will have to talk about as a board on what issues that we want to set out for more appeal process, because staff is correct that our policy currently, they are correct that our current policy does not allow them to do that. And I think the burden is on the 5 directors to think about it. And we do thank you for bringing it up to us.
So, President Wong,
Yes.
could I request that the staff come back to the board with a proposal on increasing our limit up to 250%, based on what the finance manager is saying here?
Sure,
so that we can actually formally approve that, and then we'll be able to take advantage of that.
If there was, I feel like I'm hearing interest in us doing that. And so at the board's direction, we would be happy to bring something to the February board meeting for the board to approve that we would probably make effective March 1st. That's probably what staff's recommendation would be.
All right. So you should see some relief in the future.
May I ask that you also include a special circumstance, discussion of special circumstances and how we would address those?
Sure. We could include with that item perhaps a discussion of pros and cons of having an appeals or less rigid rules versus more rigid rules.
And that would be appreciated. And also when you bring the items back, I would also like to see the financials.
Right. And that's where it's going to be really hard for us because we do not have good reporting or a good way to estimate how many of our customers may be in a band between, say, 200 and 250% of the poverty level. I can say, though, that the available revenues continue to be more than we expected for this program, and we have not achieved as many customers enrolled as we initially expected. So I do believe we have some flexibility to make an adjustment without feeling completely certain about how many customers that might bring into the program.
All right. Look forward to seeing that. Any other comments from directors on this item or Help on Tap specifically?
No. I think
Akbari?
As part of that presentation, to address some of the concerns that we heard tonight, it would be helpful to also understand how you're estimating the administrative costs for this program and how an expansion of the program might affect those administrative costs.
So we do not formally track the staff time spent in administering the program. The person who administers it does report directly to me. He's an administrative analyst in the finance department, and I am just very roughly estimating based on my perception of how much of his time is dedicated toward administering the program.
May I, since I raised the issue and in the discussion, a significant portion of our communications where people responding, customer services, is spent on Help on Tap. We have mailings and other notifications that go out to the public. So the cost goes beyond the partial hourly salary of a single employee. So it's a program.
Yeah.
Thank you. With that, no more comments? Thank you. Do I have a motion if we have no more questions for staff, do I have a motion?
I'll move staff recommendation.
And if I may clarify, the motion is to move the revised resolution as distributed this evening.
Okay.
Thank you for your input the last 2 months. I think we all appreciated it.
Okay, thank you.
So I have a motion from Director.
I'll second.
Directors Akbari,
Aye.
Gunther,
Aye.
Sethy,
Aye.
Weed,
Aye.
and Huang.
Aye. Moving on, item 5.6.
Yes, 5.6, authorization of a cooperative agreement to provide funding for shared temporary deployment of precipitation forecasting system. And for this item, our Manager of Water Resources, Laura Heides, will take the lead.
Thank you, Mr. Ahrens. The San Francisco Bay Area Advanced Quantitative Precipitation Information System Project, or AQPI project, is a California Department of Water Resources, DWR, grant-funded program developed in collaboration with federal, state, and local entities to enhance rainfall detecting radar coverage over the San Francisco Bay Area. As part of the AQPI project's network of 5 X-band radar installations, the district seeks to participate in a cooperative agreement with the lead agency, Sonoma County Water Agency, and other partners for the temporary installation and operation of 1 radar unit to be located in the East Bay. The East Bay radar unit will provide enhanced radar coverage for East Bay watersheds, including Alameda Creek. After evaluating the suitability of the temporary locations for the radar units, the AQPI project will utilize grant funding to permanently install the radar units and incorporate the data into the existing information network. The AQPI project will provide the district with enhanced rainfall predictions and finer resolution of rainfall data over the Alameda Creek watershed, benefiting district groundwater recharge activities by allowing district staff to be more proactive and informed when responding to rainfall events. Cost share entities, including the district, would help fund the estimated $165,000 in contract costs and expenses for the temporary deployment of the East Bay radar unit through 2021. Pro rata cost to the district to participate in this temporary deployment is anticipated to be $31,000. Assuming the test period is successful, willing participant agencies may discuss formation of a joint powers authority to fund long-term operations of the AQPI project after 2021. There is adequate funding in the fiscal year 2019-20 and fiscal year 2020-21 budget for this expenditure for the temporary deployment. This agreement was discussed at the Water Resources and Conservation Committee meeting on September 28, 2018, and again on September 25, 2019. Board authorization of this cost share agreement will help meet the district's strategic plan goal 2.1, maintain and enhance sustainability and reliability of local and regional water supplies, and goal 2.3, evaluate new and innovative water management concepts. So the recommendation before you tonight is by motion, authorize the general manager to enter into a cooperative agreement to provide funding for shared temporary deployment of precipitation forecasting system with the Sonoma County Water Agency in an amount not to exceed $31,000. And with that, I'm happy to answer any questions.
Questions from the board?
Just comments.
Director
So this was presented at the Water Resources Committee meeting the last 2 years, and I just want to point out, one, we're able to piggyback on this for a relatively low dollar amount. There's close to $20 million coming from Prop 84 that was passed by the voters in 2006. It's amazing that there's still that much, money available from Prop 84. And we can piggyback on this for, cents on the dollar. And I'm really enthusiastic about us working with all of our partners in the Bay Area on this type of weather forecasting system. It's really a new dawn for everybody in weather forecasting right now, especially with the atmospheric river predictions and things like that. And then lastly, I just wanted to mention to the board, I will be the board's representative next week on Wednesday at the very first installation up here in the Santa Clara Mountains with Santa Clara Valley Water District. And I'm really looking forward to taking the hike up there.
Make a note that the extraordinary advantage of better weather forecasting is the ability to modify the flood control curves in our reservoirs. Most particularly comes to mind Del Val, which is a direct water source for us, and the ability to maintain greater water supplies should the Corps of Engineers use this based on this data, be able to modify it. One small step toward eventually, hopefully, a major goal of additional 50 to 60,000 acre-feet of storage. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments? Nope, hearing none. Do I have a motion?
Depending on land acquisition.
Do I have a motion on this item, please?
I will move the item as staff recommendation.
I'll second.
Directors Akbari,
Aye.
Gunther,
Aye.
Sethy,
Aye.
Weed,
Aye.
and Huang.
Aye. And I have a request for a 5-minute recess, so why don't we take a 5 minutes recess and be back at 7:30? The next item on the agenda is item 5.7.
Yes. Good evening. Resolution awarding contract for the 2019 Public Water Storage Facilities Cleaning and Inspection Project. And tonight we have Mike Whitcomb, our Water Production Manager, who's helping fill in for me tonight, who will take this item.
Thank you, Mr. Ahrens. The district has an ongoing program to conduct regular cleaning and inspection of all treated water tanks and reservoirs. The goal is to clean and inspect all tanks and reservoirs once every 5 years as recommended by the California State Water Resource Control Board, Division of Drinking Water. Bids to clean and inspect the district's potable water storage tanks and reservoirs were recently received, opened, and evaluated. There are adequate funds in the current budget. Additional funds are planned in future year budgets for these expenditures. As of the writing of this staff report, the district's tanks and reservoir cleaning program was scheduled to be discussed with the Operations and Water Quality Committee on January 8th, 2020. Board approval of this item will help achieve district strategic plan goal 1.1, efficiently manage and maintain our infrastructure to ensure reliability, and goal 1.2, continue to meet water quality standards 100% of the time. Our recommendation is by motion, adopt a resolution authorizing the general manager to execute an agreement for tank cleaning and inspection services with Inland Potable Services, Inc., not to exceed $136,000 for a base term of 2 years, and authorize the general manager to execute up to 3 one-year extensions based on satisfactory performance for a potential total contract term of 5 years and a total not to exceed amount of $409,000.
And I just did want to point out that the resolution was updated and distributed after the original agenda was prepared.
Do I have any director's comments?
None.
I gotta say, this is one of those items that, you kind of shake your head and say, really? Divers? Cleaning the reservoir tanks? Fantastic. But, people wonder what we do, and I think sometimes we do some things that people don't really realize we do. This goes along with our fleet of boats that we have to inspect those reservoirs as well. So to the fleet admiral, I will say I will make the recommendation for the staff recommendation.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Do you have questions? No. Okay.
Directors Akbari,
Aye.
Gunther,
Aye.
Sethy,
Aye.
Weed,
Aye.
and Huang.
Aye. All right, moving on. Item 5.8, but I think we have a director that needs to recuse himself.
I will be recusing myself from item 5.8 as both properties under consideration fall within 1,000 feet of real property interest that I have. So to avoid any conflict of interest.
I want to ask a real quick question. Director Akbari, did you recuse yourself from the committee meeting, which was a public meeting also?
So I did bring it up at the committee meeting, and I was advised by exec staff that because we were not making any decisions within the committee meeting, I could sit in on the committee meeting, but could not comment on the item. If I've stated that correctly.
Okay. As President Wong is aware of, I was very disappointed in the Engineering Committee report. And I don't mean any offense to the directors, but I raised quite a few questions that I thought should have been addressed in that meeting that were not, and I received a very comprehensive report back from the general manager that President Wong was copied on. So I just wanted to clarify that.
All right,
I hope that
before we...
I personally feel that it would have been the responsible thing to recuse yourself from the committee meeting. That was a public meeting.
Hold on.
That's just personal opinion.
I understand, but I am not moving on this item until ASA director leaves the room.
Yeah.
Thank you. All right, with that, let's move on to item 5.8, public hearing to consider determination that real property located at Deer Road and located at Bishop Avenue are no longer of use to the district and declaring intention to dispose of the properties.
Yes, good evening. I'll provide a quick summary on this item. The Government Code sections 50569 through 50573 requires an annual inventory of all lands held by a public agency be completed and a list prepared of all surplus properties. A public hearing must proceed the transfer of property included on the list. The district's Deer Road and Bishop Avenue properties have been identified as surplus to the district's needs and are no longer of use to the district, and is recommended that these properties be declared surplus. The recommendation to surplus these two properties was most recently reviewed with the Engineering Information Technology Committee on December 18th, 2019. The sale of surplus properties helps meet the district's strategic plan goal 3.2, ensure cost reasonableness. Staff will supplement this staff report by making a presentation at the board meeting. The recommendation tonight is that the board, 1, conduct a public hearing on the proposal to surplus and transfer the two properties noted above, and 2, by motion, adopt a resolution determining these real properties are no longer of use to the district and declaring the district's intent to dispose of them. And with that, I'll turn it back over to the president.
All right, so the question is, have we received any written comments?
We have not received any comments that I know of.
Correct.
No.
Okay. And Mr. Stevenson, do you have a presentation for me?
Indeed, I do. Thank you. And so this item has a, fairly long and complicated title, and so I've done my best to prepare a complicated presentation. However, I will note that the actual recommendation and the action to be taken is fairly straightforward. But let's go ahead and get started by quickly reviewing why staff is making this recommendation. And it really follows recent changes to state law that governs how public agencies dispose of surplus land, the process that needs to be followed and so forth. Those changes were implemented through Assembly Bill 1486, which was signed into law in October and became effective on January 1st. So while that bill was going through the process, staff was working to market and prepare properties for sale that had been previously surplused by the board of directors. And so in order to ensure that we're in compliance with the law as has been revised now, we want to ensure that we are repeating certain steps associated with the process that's governed by that Surplus Land Act. And that's why we're recommending that the board resurplus and resend, such that staff can resend certain notices to entities that I'll cover in a minute as part of the process. So with that, I'll indicate the item covers two properties. It covers our Deer Road property and another that I'll get to. Our Deer Road property, shown here on these figures, it's nestled up in the hills above the Upper Canyon Heights neighborhood. It's bounded on the east by East Bay Regional Park District parkland and on the west by San Francisco Public Utilities property that contains their old Niles Reservoir, and then on the north and south by public properties. It's a little under 4.3 acres, and it was once reserved by the district for use as a tank or a reservoir site. The district has no present use for the property other than to maintain it and provide for security. There is no long-term use for the property in the district's capital improvement program. It's currently zoned residential. In the staff report, well, I'll get to that in a moment. The board previously declared the property surplus twice in the past, once in 1992 and once in 2002. And staff went through the process of marketing the property 3 different times previously. There's been varying levels of interest in purchasing the property, and there were a number of issues associated with that, having primarily to do with how the property depends on the adjacent SFPUC property to fully develop. I'll point out that issues related to marketability and other factors that affected past marketing approaches really don't pertain to whether the board should surplus the property again. It's mostly information that's provided just for context for the board.
May I ask questions? We did have a contract with Greenbrier, and I understand did they not develop a fairly comprehensive set of plans for and process for review by the city of Fremont?
Correct. Greenbrier went through a good part of the entitlement process, including many studies and so forth, and they did develop at least the beginning stages of a tentative tract map, went through the city process to a large extent. They were under contract with both ACWD and also the SFPUC at the same time. That, as you may recall, that process ultimately fell through when the real estate market dropped out in 2008.
Is that work product available to ACWD, or do we have ownership and access to the work product?
So, yes, and in fact, the district completed the work to finalize the tentative tract map and presented the finalized map to the Planning Commission. It was narrowly approved at that time. However, since there is a shelf life to those maps, and that map has now expired.
I understand the map was extended, and then finally you only have so many extensions, but it is adds value to the property in the sense you have some preliminary work done on it.
Well, it does add some value given that it's got some history, and like I said, there was CEQA and other studies done. However, the map itself has expired, which means all of the entitlements and rights that go along with having that tentative map, they're now expired, and so any sort of any new proposal to develop the property would have to comply with all the new requirements.
Understand.
Yeah. Also associated with this property, and not necessarily associated with a board action to surplus it, but simply to provide this additional context, staff has been working with the San Francisco Public Utilities Commission, who is actively right now working to market their property. And so we've been discussing with SFPUC. We're at the early stages now. There's nothing formal, but we just want to sort of provide full disclosure that we've been working with their staff on a conceptual approach to jointly market those two properties together in a coordinated way, with the understanding that that will help to clear up some of the barriers that we've had in marketing the property in the past. Since our property relies on their property to some extent, and their property certainly relies on our property, the idea is if we can coordinate that process, it would potentially be advantageous for both agencies to do. So, so just wanted to share that this is a process underway, and it was mentioned in committee, but we did not go into any detail really at all, other than to say that's ongoing. Another factor associated with the Deer Road property, which is shown in the center of this figure here, is the Sonoma Aqueduct. I bring it up again, not necessarily relating directly to the board's action here, but certainly it's an item that's brought up frequently related to this property. And so just to make sure the public understands, the Sonoma Aqueduct is an old concrete box flume that extends from the east side of Niles Canyon to the west side, and it was historically used by San Francisco PUC and their predecessors to move water down the canyon, and it terminates in the Niles Reservoir, which is adjacent to the district's Deer Road property, and there is a piece of that old aqueduct on our property. I wanted to point out that the district staff has looked into this aqueduct as a possible candidate to move water through the canyon should the district ever decide that we had a use to do that. We've evaluated what information we could through on-site walking and reconnaissance, and also records and conversations with SFPUC staff, and determined that much of the aqueduct is intact and potentially reusable really up until you get to the old Mission Clay product site, where much of it has been removed. Also, areas further downstream from that have been removed and an easement extinguished. But we did look at it and different alternatives also for making use of that aqueduct. On this figure, that's kind of hard to see, but it's an excerpt from a study that we had done a couple of years ago on this topic. There's a number of colored lines, and those represent different routes that we could potentially run an extension of this aqueduct through the area, through the Upper Canyon Heights area, all the way to our groundwater recharge facilities. And so what I wanted to point out was that we have done some reconnaissance level analyses in terms of routing this extension of the aqueduct, and have found that if we were to do this, we would probably prefer to run the alignment as shown here in blue, which I've just added this to the figure, which really doesn't make use of the portion of the old aqueduct that runs through the Upper Canyon Heights neighborhood and then terminates in the Niles Reservoir. So I just wanted to point that out. We have looked at that. It's feasible from a infrastructure standpoint. We did not look at the water supply or water resource implications or water supply permit implications or anything like that. There would be more to do in that area if we were to consider this, but I just wanted to point that out, that this work had been done, and staff's own view is that a preferred way to move water through that area would actually be down Old Canyon Road, using the access road to the Mission Clay Products site. The second property that staff is proposing be resurplus this evening is our Bishop Avenue property. This is a very small site that's located in a residential area near Peralta and Paseo Padre. It's actually less than 4,500 square feet, and it's a remnant from a much larger site that the district used to own and sold in the 1990s to a developer. Again, here there's no present district use, and there's no long-term use in the district's capital improvement program. It is zoned residential.
May I ask what the original intent was on the purchase of the property and when it was purchased? Was it for well sites, or what was it?
So the property, the larger property, and let's see if I can get the laser to work here.
Because I know those are older homes around there.
So, well, actually, the property that this was associated with was the property across the railroad tracks and adjacent to Alameda Creek, the so-called Riverwalk property.
Yeah.
And you can see it that my little red arrow on the left-hand figure overlies that property.
Yeah.
It was actually purchased to be potentially another groundwater recharge pit. It was going to be pit T3. You can see adjacent to the left there are pits T1 and pits T2. This would have been pit T3. The district determined that it didn't need additional groundwater recharge capacity in that location and sold the property in the 90s. This little remnant parcel was once used to access that pit, that perhaps future pit T3 property, and of course is no longer used that way.
But aren't the railroad tracks going right behind there?
Yep.
So how could you build a pit right there where the railroad
Oh,
tracks are?
the pit would have been on the north side of the railroad tracks. If I could get my laser to work, I'd show you, but I'm having trouble with it. So right where the red arrow is, above the red arrow are all those homes. Those are relatively new, built in the 90s, right between the railroad and Alameda Creek. Hey, thank you.
I'm a little bit too short to do that.
Yeah, but you had it right.
Yeah.
Oh, thanks, Tina.
That's what the Riverwalk is.
Yeah, so it's right in here. This is the Riverwalk development.
Okay, I got it.
Yeah.
I've seen that at the council.
Okay. And now I'm trying to advance these guys. Oh, is it taking? Thank you. Still not able to. Would you mind just hitting it for me? One more. Okay, so on this property, once again, the board had previously declared this property surplus in 2002, and it was marketed previously. There's been little interest in purchasing this property, given that it's a very small lot in an R16 zoning, which means typical lot sizes would be 6,000 square feet instead of less than 4,500. So the process to sell and surplus this to
I have a quick question on the property and the potential.
Yeah, go ahead.
We have a new legislation that is coming through, and even more is being proposed for surplus properties being made available for affordable housing. And the suggestion is that that could even supersede local zoning ordinances and regulations. Might that be one of the issues that will be encountered if we do put it on the market?
So AB 1486 was indeed intended to make a number of changes to address how certain public agencies were trying to implement their processes in a way that was not the way the legislature had intended. And so AB 1486 was designed to fix some of those, and certainly the purpose being to benefit housing availability and targeted to low and moderate income housing. So some of those changes were made. As AB 1486 went through the legislature, there were changes that such that certain requirements were backed away from. But yes, AB 1486 already implements some of that. Now there may be more in the future. AB 1486 followed other changes that were made only a couple of years prior, so there are changes kind of happening fairly frequently in this area. So yes, it's possible that there could be more changes in the future.
Or impacting the marketability of the property for regardless of city zoning?
That's
or
possible,
irregardless
yes.
of city zoning?
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay, so the process to sell surplus properties is that the board would declare the property surplus, or in this case, resurplus the property. After that, staff would issue notices of availability for sale or lease to certain entities, including low and moderate income housing sponsors, school districts, cities, counties, park and recreation, and so forth. If any of those entities indicated an interest in the district property or properties, we would need to then enter into good faith negotiations for a minimum period of time. If those discussions resulted in no agreement, or if none of those entities above indicated any interest in the property, the district would be free to broadly market and sell the property. Gina, would you mind? Yeah, thank you. So this is the process as that we would follow. Essentially, as you remember, we've got properties that we're working on preparing for market, including the Deer Road property. So you see on this chart, there's two rows of boxes, one on the top and one in the middle there. The one in the middle is mostly focused on our Deer Road property, and I'll get to that. Generally, the process that we'd follow is if the board were to take action to surplus these properties tonight, we would begin the process of making those notifications that I talked about. If there was interest from those public entities that I listed, then we would engage in those good faith negotiations. If there was no interest, then we'd be free to market the properties. But in the meantime, with regard to the Deer Road property, we would continue to discuss the potential joint marketing of that property with the SFPUC. Since they are moving forward to market their property, we'd want to try and coordinate that if possible. If we were to do that, we would bring back a joint marketing agreement to the board, which would contain a lot more detail than I'm able to share tonight because, like I say, those discussions are only in their preliminary stages. Following that, we'd bring back a purchase and sales agreement, again, for board approval before we did anything further with the property to put it to market. Once the board approved both of those, then we'd be able to go to market. And, of course, we'd bring back any proposals that we'd received through the process back to the board. So the purpose of this is to make sure the board understands that surplusing the properties tonight is not, does not have an impact on those marketing terms or the terms and conditions of the actual sale. There's a lot more to do in that regard, and those would be handled in the future. So with that, staff's recommendation is to conduct a public hearing on the proposal to surplus and transfer the two properties noted above. And 2, by motion, adopt a resolution determining these real properties are no longer of use to the district and declaring the district's intention to dispose of them. And I'd be happy to address any questions.
Do I have any additional questions, comments from the board? Director Sethy.
So I'm supportive of where the staff is going here on this, and I have been for a long time. But I do have some questions. First of all, I just want to say I want to thank Mr. Shaver, who's not here tonight, for answering all the questions I had about the Deer Road property. And I'm not going to go into any details about that right now. I think it's better left for when we're actually in negotiations in private session. But if the general manager is willing to, I don't mind sharing his reply to my questions with the rest of the board as appropriate. On the Bishop Avenue property, from your knowledge, Mr. Stevenson, would somebody be able to actually build a single family residential home on that lot? Would it meet the city requirements?
Yeah, that's really the question. And as the district has coordinated with the city of Fremont in the past, the answer to that question has changed over time. Yeah. Because development of that lot would require special concession by the city since it doesn't meet the minimum lot size requirements. Yeah. But there are other factors at play, including the fact that it's a planned district in that area, and so there is some discretionary authority that the city has. So in recent discussions with the city, they've indicated that indeed, yes, it could potentially be a lot for a single-family house.
So is the minimum requirement 4,800 square feet?
It's typically 6,000 in that zone.
6,000, okay. So I only looked at the property over Google Maps and stuff like that, and one thought I had was if it doesn't meet the requirement for a residential home that's comparable to the other homes in the neighborhood, might the best appropriate use be park access to the other side? That you make it a small park where people can walk to the creek side.
Well, there is the railroad that separates that property from the creek area.
Yeah, but they could put a little overpass right there. Underpass.
So
it's the river side
Riverwalk.
development that they want to do. So maybe in the future the city could think of something creative right there.
It doesn't have to be used for residential. It's zoned residential now. This is likely a property where if we were to put it on the market, we might end up with a kind of a long entitlement period because of that uncertainty over its potential use.
Okay, considering another property that we put on the market recently, is there the possibility of subdividing this straight in half so that it's could be acquired by either property owner on either side?
Yes. In fact, over the years, we've had a number of discussions with the adjacent property owners, and I think that the ownership has changed hands a few times, but we've had discussions with them about things like purchasing pieces of their property, which are a little bit oversized. If you look at the tract map, the adjacent properties are a little larger than the average, and ours, of course, is a little smaller. So we've had discussions about purchasing portions of their property, also just selling portions of our property, one piece to each neighbor. We've also had discussions about selling the entire lot to one of the adjacent neighbors. And that's the one that was a focus of our work for some time because it's difficult to have both neighbors agree on the same approach.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of possibilities, but again, there's a number of things that could happen should the district surplus that property, and that just starts a process.
Are you able to say within a very wide range what the value of that property might be?
So we've had it appraised in the past, and we've also recently looked at comps ourselves. We have not gone out for another appraisal. If the property cannot be built upon, then the value is very low. In fact, it's on the order of maybe $50,000 to $60,000. But again, it's a lot that would have to be sorted out. If it could be built upon, the value goes up significantly.
So this is more in reference to the Deer property, this question. Do we need to go through another process with the Fremont Planning Department? Do we have to go to the Fremont Planning Commission again or City Council to be able to remarket this property? Is San Francisco planning on doing the same thing?
So there's certainly no requirement that we do that. Generally, that's not done by the seller or by a public agency. We did it in our case last time just to maximize the value to our customers from revenue from that property. In this case, like I mentioned, that work is now not going to be that valuable. It's all expired. So generally, in this case, our expectation would be that the purchaser do that or the developer of the property do that, and rather than the district. But again, any approach is possible once it's surplus.
So it's not a limitation in terms of
Correct.
marketing the property. That's what I wanted to get
Right.
to. Okay,
There is one requirement that's built into your resolution that we do need to give the city notice and be sure it's in the transfer.
Yeah, for all public agencies.
But that's in the front end. The marketing is complete.
Yeah, okay. I have a request finally of staff. I would like the specific property addresses that require the recusal of Director Akbari and the perimeter that's required around those properties.
I think
Their circumference around those properties.
I think that's actually with our agenda package, isn't it?
So each of the properties that members of the board have indicated they have some sort of interest in have been mapped.
Yeah.
The addresses themselves are not included on the map. Obviously, we have the address that the director provided to staff, but you can see each property on the map if you look at it.
The director is claiming 2 properties where there's a recusal required. I would like the property address for both. That's what I'm requesting of staff.
Thank you.
Okay.
Well, I'm not on that topic at all. I'm on to the aqueduct, if I might.
Make it short, please.
I will try. When I came on the board, the Sonoma Aqueduct was operational. It was in the late 1990s, I understand, that it was taken out of operation. And portions of it operated until 2004. One of my great failures as a board member was the failure to assure that we retained that asset of a water supply parallel to Alameda Creek, which had the potential of being connected to the South Bay Aqueduct and directly fed into our quarry pits. Because as we found out, using Alameda Creek as a water supply access is problematic at best in the long term, incredibly expensive with rubber dams and fish ladders. And we can't even, there are times that we can't even release water down Alameda Creek because of other environmental, and that window could shrink even more. So to lose potential access to a pipeline where you merely turn a valve to fill your water supply was an incredible failure of this district and a failure that I feel personally. In the interim, in more recent times, we've lost even other sections of it, where San Francisco's given up easements, which is a great part of this. As part of the brickyard development. And we were not even aware of that, I'm told. Nor did we care, apparently. Hundreds, and we're spending at least $1,000 per customer to replicate, to try and do something that just to sure inaction on our part. So as we now look at trying to restore, capture portions of it, hopefully we'll take that in seriously. When we talked about the trail, we talked about preserving the aqueduct for future water rights. But that we make that put that in our planning, identify the necessary easements we're now going to need, and determine if maybe reacquiring the easements, even if it requires removing a residence or two, or in their backyard, may be the solution. Because you had a working aqueduct that would have met our basic water supply requirements, not only in a contingency, but as a regular basis in regular operations. 7 feet high, about almost 6 feet wide. You can put a pipe in it. It was built to grade, relatively inexpensive. So hopefully as we go through this process, as we start surplusing things, we can recognize some of our failures and address and maybe document what we want to do and how we would do it, and put notices on properties that we may need for easements, particularly when they're owned by other public entities, as San Francisco PUC did with the brickyard and the causeway there. So my statement, the last time we went through this, we reserved the potential easement on the Deer Road property for the extension of the aqueduct, and I would encourage us to do that again.
With that, any other comments, questions?
I would like to make
Director
one comment
Gunther?
that I don't agree with Director Weed's opinion on this. However, this item is not on the agenda tonight. The Niles Aqueduct is not on the agenda, so I won't make any further comments regarding it, other than I disagree with your position on it and have been on the board the entire time you have when this has gone through. That said, the portion of this aqueduct in regards to Deer Road property, I think the staff has already shown us this evening is a non-issue, that this could be run without that. And if we were to go ahead and redo the what we've done twice now, although this sitting board has only done once, is resurplus. The first time it was done prior to our arrivals. I do have one request from staff is, I don't think it's an issue, but if we were to not take action on this tonight, what would occur?
So if we were to not take action to resurplus, that would imply that the board is not surplusing the property, and that would effectively make it unsurplused. And if council has anything to add to that, I'd certainly invite it.
Yeah, great question. Currently, the board has already declared both of these properties as surplus property. The reason we're here before you tonight is basically my recommendation because of the change in the law, and the requirement now to, before you actually sell the property, is to give notice to the Department of Housing and Community Development, and you have to provide them with the information of the written notifications that you've given to the various entities that you're supposed to give notice to, and make sure that they didn't have any interest, or if they did have interest, that you've negotiated. And there's some potential penalties that could come with this if the Department of Housing determines that there's a violation of the procedural aspects. So my recommendation is, because we have to go through this and because we surplus this in 2002, is we should do the process again so we have a clear resolution after the change in the law. We have clear notices to the entities that we're supposed to, and if nobody expressed an interest, then we have the flexibility to market and dispose of the property as we deem fit, but we've followed all the procedural requirements. So the question is, if you don't take that action tonight, my recommendation as your general counsel is don't proceed with selling these properties because we haven't complied with the procedural requirements.
Thank you.
If I may note, and it's my understanding in each of the prior surpluses, we retained an easement for a water line across the property.
Not as part of the surplusing of the property.
Not as part of
that may come later.
The easement is not part of this decision then?
No,
Okay.
this is just,
Thank you.
do we need the property or do we not need the property?
Correct. All right, without any additional questions?
Move staff recommendation.
Oh, excuse me.
Hold on.
Do we need to have a public hearing, open and close?
Oh, yes, sorry.
Thank you.
Okay.
Sorry. Good point.
All right.
So I guess the next would be public hearing, and seeing no member of the public.
No, wait a minute, I need some clarification here. I thought we were approving having a public hearing like in next month or the future. It's here now?
Right,
Yes.
correct, it's here.
Okay, I did not understand.
This is the public hearing.
This is the public hearing.
Okay.
Okay.
But,
I will.
when we have our water rates, we always approve having the public hearing in the future. So that's why I was disconnected here.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. There are certain statutory requirements for certain types of public hearing and notices. So, for example, your water rates, the Constitution basically says you must give X number of days notice before your public hearing. The statutes here just say you must hold a public hearing, so we've notified it in accordance with the Brown Act, and that's sufficient for this public hearing.
So this is it.
Process.
Correct. Public had their chance.
So I will open the public hearing and close the public hearing since we have no member of the public. I think our League of Women's Voter representative usually do not provide comments.
But she's here. She's a member of the
That's
public.
true. We
and
do
there's
have a
no
member of the public
comment to
observing.
this,
Would the one
item,
member
I
of the
think.
public wish to make comments on this item? Thank you. Then I will close the public comment. And we have talked about there's no written material or written comments except received on this item, right? Okay. And we already have our question and answer session before the public comment, apparently.
So Director Gunther has moved the staff
Right.
recommendation.
I moved the recommendation, which included the public hearing.
I will second.
Director Gunther,
Aye.
Sethy,
Aye.
Weed,
Aye.
and Huang.
Aye. And before we move on, would someone please get Director Akbari back, please? He has this great script that the staff gave me. Except he got hijacked. No,
It happens.
it happens. Thank you. So please let the record show that Director Akbari is back. So let's move on to item 6, reports.
Yes, in your packet, there's a series of reports from staff, and we don't have any presentations tonight, but we're available to answer any questions.
Do I have any questions from directors on either the committee reports or operational reports?
None.
I would like to comment on the hardness report. I should have commented on when the Union City city manager was here. The coloring where my area has dropped into these shades of, I believe, yellow. I don't think I've ever in my lifetime seen that shade of yellow. So I don't know what we did, but that was pretty interesting. I think I'm I can't remember my number there, but not very far from one of our meters. And yeah, we're actually in the yellow for a change. Phenomenal. Thank you.
No other questions or comments? All right, then let's see. We don't have staff presentations today. Then General Manager's reports, please.
Yes, we do have one item tonight. Quick report on the state agency's draft water resiliency portfolio, and Water Resources Manager Laura Heides will give a quick update.
Thank you, Mr. Ahrens. Staff wanted to make the board aware that on January 2nd, the state released a draft of the 2020 Water Resilience Portfolio in response to Governor Newsom's Executive Order N-1019, which builds on state and local initiatives already underway, as well as public input collected over many months during 2019. The draft portfolio includes a suite of more than 100 recommended actions to help California cope with more extreme droughts and floods, rising temperatures, declining fish populations, aging infrastructure, and other challenges. It embraces a broad, diversified approach with goals and actions organized into 4 categories. First, maintain and diversify water supplies. Second, protect and enhance natural ecosystems. Third, build connections. And 4, be prepared. Staff is currently reviewing the draft portfolio and so far is encouraged that many of the initiatives and projects that the district is pursuing are aligned with the goals of the portfolio. Staff is engaging with industry association efforts to review and comment on the draft with comments due on February 7th. And that's all I've got to report.
And that's it for the General Manager's report, unless you have any questions.
Questions from directors? Nope. All right, then let's move on to director's comments. Director Wee?
None at this time. Apparently I don't have a meeting I attended, so I'm in good shape.
Director Sethy, I think you also have item 7.1.
I attended the BOSCA Board Policy Committee meeting, which I occasionally do, last month, and I just want to report on a couple of things. You know, it's always good to check in with BOSCA and see what's going on and hear the public comments, too. So I just want to let the board know, first of all, on our system capacity as of December 1st. This is kind of surprising because we're at the beginning of the rainfall season, that the total Tuolumne storage was at 88.8% of storage. Of that, Hetch-Hetchy was at 78%. I'm rounding things off. Our water bank, with which we don't pay a lot of attention to with Hetch-Hetchy, is 570,000 acre feet. The total capacity of the Hetch-Hetchy, Cherry, and Eleanor reservoirs is around 625. So our water bank is at 99.9% right now, and almost as much capacity as all of the other 3 Tuolumne reservoirs. The lowest reservoir in our system is actually Calaveras behind the hills. It's at 63% right now. The other reservoirs are between 81 and 93%. So as of December 1, our reservoir system with Hetch-Hetchy is in a very healthy state. You know, you would expect to see these numbers at the end of a rainfall season.
I think it's helpful to note San Francisco has several years of water supply in the local water storage to meet their needs. And the water bank is paper water, which means that they can still extract additional water supplies, so double what they have currently in storage from Hetch-Hetchy. It's not Don Pedro water, right, but that's it's paper water that they have contractual rights to in the Don Pedro Reservoir. So they're quite well supplied at present. The water The real issue they have is on the ability to convey water into the Bay Area. And there's some ongoing litigation with, on the Don Pedro Dam FERC process, and there have been some papers filed, which were public papers, where the environmentalists are arguing that San Francisco should be, the Bay Area, total delivery should be limited to about 200 MGD, million gallons a day, when the system's designed for 305. So it will be interesting to see when you're dealing with the environmental community, there's never enough that they wish to take away from us. We'll keep taking and taking and taking, restricting and preventing you from developing water supplies, as we're finding in the Deval discussions.
Yeah, just building on what Director Weed is saying. The water bank for San Francisco, SFPUC, is 570,000 acre feet. Our water bank, which we're nearly full on, is I think 140 to 160,000 acre feet. That's four years of water storage we have in our water bank right now, which I will point out our ratepayers have paid for.
Yep.
Right? So we've paid for banking our water. This is what Director Kohler came up with as an idea many years ago. So we've got four years of water storage there. To build on what Director Weed is saying, the allocation for the Bay Area Hetch Hetchy water users is, I believe, 184 MGD. And for the last couple of years, we've been operating at around 125 MGD. So we're well below the maximum entitlement for all of the Bay Area customers.
But what's scary about that is, in this litigation, the environmentalists are trying to lock in that reduced water supply permanently as being our maximum level. A true no-growth effort.
Yes, in fact, there were public comments made. Peter Dreckmeyer from the Tuolumne River Restoration Trust spoke out and said, hey, if you can live with 125 MGD per day, even though your entitlement is 184, that gives us 60 MGD that we can release to, the rivers and for the fish. So
whitewater rafting with Peter Dreckmeyer, part of this. Yeah.
So that argument was put forward at the meeting, and every meeting I go to, it's put forward. There's somebody there to express that sentiment. I also, I purposely attended because I wanted to learn more about what the intent of BOSCA is with Los Vaqueros Reservoir. And so they went through quite a discussion on that. I'm not going to go into all the details here. If you want to go to the website, there's all the minutes on it. But they were talking about wheeling the water into the Bay Area, all the mechanisms and the arrangements that have to be made. Of importance to ACWD is that it's critical that the water be processed someplace. And there are only two destinations for processing, here in Mission San Jose with ACWD or at the Berryessa plant with Santa Clara Valley Water District. So I think we should pay attention to this as things develop, because this would be an absolute revenue opportunity for ACWD. And perhaps it might mean re-engaging our Mission San Jose treatment plant, which is mothballed right now. Last thing I'm going to say, and I will say this as a concern, there was a discussion about the investment policy, just like we've gone through a review of our investment policy recently for the district. And there were some very sharp questions that were asked by board members of the CEO. And frankly, as close a friend as I think Nicole Sankula is to us and me personally, I was really dissatisfied with the answers that staff was providing and the way that, and I'm hoping Director Weed, as our board representative, will bring this up at the next formal board meeting. the CEO is making all the decisions on where to invest the money, which I find a conflict of interest. When you have 100% of all the investment decisions made by the CEO. There has never been any reports on historical returns year to year, quarter to quarter. There is no performance benchmarks like we have as a standard here in our district, where the rest of the BOSCA members can see how well they have $21 million right now that is invested. They don't have any benchmarks for how their investments are doing against the market. There's no formal policy for the distribution of funds. I found everything about the presentation. I think the CEO was caught off guard because there were some really pointed questions. I, as an observer, did not comment. I was just there as an observer for the district, but I felt very uncomfortable about how the investment decisions and reporting are being made to the rest of the BOSCA board members. So I'm going to ask Director Weed to please follow up on that at the next board meeting. I should have, maybe I should have provided some written comments back to the CEO, but I didn't.
Oh.
Thank you. That's actually good to know, and I'm pretty sure Director Wee will bring it up as concern from the ACWD board.
Not being on the policy committee anymore, being a member of a 26-member board, your sound bites are limited.
It definitely is limited, but please give it a try because we do have legitimate concerns. Director Gunther?
Only comment would be up there. I wanted to make one comment. I appreciate Director Weed's standing up here and taking on the nomination for the insurance authority, joint power authority for our district. Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate your stepping up.
Director Akbari? And actually, I just have a request to the board. Being my first official board meeting, I would just ask the rest of the director, myself included, to respect each other's differences. We ask very different questions or not ask questions. We complement each other as a board. I firmly believe that because there are things that I fully acknowledge that I don't know, and I will count on the other directors to help fill in that gap. But I would ask for a little bit respect when we talk to each other. And that would be my ask for this year. Otherwise, I will behave. So thank you. And with that, I will call the meeting adjourned at 8:32.